we've gone to the point where we kind of want a really clean image. We want, as you can see with this point of view, is the texture is really clean and the transitions are as good as it's going to get at this step with this level of work. There's also a lot more we could do. Number one, we can dodge and burn a lot more for 3 hours or whatever, and you could see me sit here and dodge and burn for that period of time, which I'm not going to do to you, because I know people want a faster workflow. And even though this tool is really powerful, what I typically do in my workflow is, with my dodge and burn settings, I keep it to the point where all the transitions are evened out from a distance. So I don't zoom in and I don't pixel level dodge and burn a lot of the times. For commercial jobs, maybe. But for a standard workflow, this is what I do. I keep it zoomed out and I see all the areas that need to be dodged and burned, I fix it. And then the rest of it, which includes the micro transitions, will become part of the next step within our lighting subcategory. Okay? Just like we mentioned, now going back to our image, you see that zoomed out, a lot of our dodging was to even out darker areas of the skin so that they blend in better with the surrounding areas. And that's the effective principle I want you guys to take away as you're looking at this. Similarly with burning, we want to darken the areas that stand out as too light. Now this black and white layer was essentially just a mask to see exactly what our tonal values were. Because if you started dodging without your black and white layer, you're going to create a lot of work for yourself. And it's a good challenge, but it's not that fun to do. So with that being said, we're going to continue on after dodging and burning and going on to our next step, which is going to be where I use my frequency separation. And let me go and start from the beginning about frequency separation. I'm going to give you a layman's terms about what frequency separation is for those of you who don't know. Surprisingly, even within my workshops, we have half of the people or more who still don't know what it is. And then the rest of the group of people know what it is, but use it for a different purpose or intention than I use it for. Now, what frequency separation is essentially the ability to split an image into two different layers. You can split it into its texture components and color components. So you have everything that's color related about the layer on its own layer, or about the image on its own layer. Anything regarding the texture of the image is placed on its own layer. So you have these two different layers that combine into one that become your high frequency, which is your texture, your low frequency, which is your color and light information. Collectively, they become your image. Now, I'm going to show you first how it's done. And then I'm going to show you what you use it for. Okay? Now, this is also an action I've included within the downloads, is the ability to do this frequency separation without manually having to go in and create this every single time. Okay? So, I'm not going to click on the action in my Photoshop menu, but I'm going to go and manually do this. So first and foremost, I'm going to click on the topmost layer. Make sure that your black and white adjustment layer is deleted, because you don't want to continue with your black and white adjustment layer on. Otherwise, your whole image from this point will become black and white. Okay? Now, first and foremost, save. And yes, I've read that you think I'm not saving enough. I agree. I don't save it enough. But again, it's definitely important to make sure that we save quite often. Now, going forward, let's go and start this whole frequency separation process. I'm going to create a stamp, a merge visible stamp. Now, essentially what this means, and I call it merge visible stamp. I think there's a more technical name for it, but I don't remember what it is. However, what this means and what this is going to do is everything that you see right now on my layer stack, we're going to take a snapshot of it. I'm going to paste it back on top. Because right now, as we look in Photoshop, you'll see that there's no way to copy everything we've done here and put it in its own layer. If you try to copy it right now, you copy a folder. And so we want a collective snapshot of everything we've done so far. And the way that we're going to do this is by holding a few commands. It's Shift, Option, Command, and the letter E on the Mac side. I forgot what it is on the PC side. That's a lot of keys to remember. I'm not going to go over that. I think it's something like Control Option Shift E. So you're essentially replacing Control with Command and Alt and Option, which are very similar keys, yeah? So on the Mac, Shift, Option, Command E will generate this layer here, which is my stamp. And what that does is it is a copy of everything we've done so far. So if I turn every layer below it off, you'll see that that is an exact copy of everything we've worked on so far. And also a really cool tip, if you hit Option and the layer itself on the eye, it hides everything else except that layer. So if I hold my Option push down and I click on the eye, it selects just the layer or group that you are wanting to display. Just a quick tidbit. It's just something that I use whenever I'm working really quickly. I want to see the before and after real quick. That's a good way to do so. Another thing you can do is you can hold down once after you enabled visibility on one layer, and as you're holding down, scroll down and it lights up every one of your layers. So I can easily go in and hold down my bottom layer and scroll up, and it takes out the visibility of everything. And so that's another way that I typically like to go back and forth between changes. Okay, back to our original point. We have this merge visible stamp, essentially, where we're creating a copy of everything we've done so far and paste it on its own layer. Now, we're going to be using another version of the same thing, and these two things are going to become our low frequency and high frequency, okay? Our texture and our color. So let's go ahead and duplicate this layer or do that merge visible stamp one more time. Or you can Command J and it duplicates the same thing, which is the same thing as creating another merge visible copy. Now, first and foremost, on this bottom layer, don't freak out when I do this. This is not what you think it is. I'm going to go ahead and blur. Oh my God, he's blurring. Chat rooms are gonna light up. Blurring, he's a liar. Throw him on the cross. Okay, now with Gaussian blur, I'm going to make sure that the intent of this is I'm going to throw away all the texture. Okay, I'm just gonna throw it away. And the reason is I'm going to take that back and put it on the top. Like a little magic trick here. So when it comes up with the amount of Gaussian blur to use, I will typically not rely on the number, but I will rely on looking at this little preview and figuring out just to the point where all my texture is gone. And for example, when I move this and click on this little preview, you'll realize that the texture's there and now it's gone. If I go and have a low number, say, hello, like 1.3, there's still some texture detail present. We essentially want to remove that so we see nothing but the actual color and light information, and all the texture details gone. I typically think it's either between 3.0 or 2.0 or 3.0. If you do it too much, what will happen is a lot of that color and light detail will go back into the texture layer and it does something very funky. And you'll see what I mean as I redo this incorrectly, okay? Because a lot of people also do this incorrectly. They don't know the figure to use. With me, I think 2 and 3 is a great number typically. So I'm going to hit OK. And so what happened was essentially that layer got blurred, okay? Fantastic. No, not fantastic, but fantastic for now. Oh God, I hope someone's not tuning in right now. I'm just wondering why it's blurred everything. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use this top layer to retain everything we've thrown away. And the way that we do this is we're going to go to Image, make sure that layer is selected on the top. Image, and Apply Image. Where did it go here? My eyes are going crazy here. Oh, here it is. We're under layer. That's why. There we go. Apply image. Clearly, I have used action too much to even remember where it is. All right. So now where it says layer, make sure you're selecting layer 1 because that's where it's going to be, that is where it's going to be feeding off of. The setting is as follows. For 8-bit images, we have to go in and select, let's see, subtract. The scale must be 2, offset must be 128, and you want to make sure invert is not selected. This is why I included an action, because I'd rather you not remember everything, but this is how you manually do it. Now, I'm going to hit OK, and the blending mode is going to be linear light. Now, we've effectively created a beautiful split. And I'll show you exactly how I know. I'm going to select these 2 layers by hitting Shift and clicking on both of them, or Command, and I'm going to drag it down or hold G or whatever to bring it into another group. I'll name this frequency. Now, when I turn this layer on and off, what typically happens is nothing happens, right? It looks exactly the same as our original image. So let me turn off all these other layers for a second. So this is everything we've worked on so far. So check this out. When I turn off the bottom, you will see that the texture of the lips and the pores and everything in the eye is all there. But you don't see this color seeping through, okay? Now, when I turn the low on, it fills it in like a coloring book. You literally split it in half. It's a beautiful split. Now, let me show you what happens when you do a split wrong. So I'm going to go and delete this again. I'll run my little action. Let's say that I have a pixel radius of like 8. And it created this frequency. What happens is, let me put this off. You see all the color that came through? That means some of the low frequency detail, which is the color and light, spilled into the texture. So it's not effective, meaning sometimes you may not be able to retain the results that you would accordingly. Okay, so that is what frequency separation is. We haven't talked about what we're going to do with it or how it's typically used. So typically, the way this works, let me actually do a proper one first. So I'll put it back to 3.0, which I think is fantastic. I'd rather err on the side of caution rather than going too far, which again is, I think, something that's based on whatever number you typically use, but I use between 2 and 3 for the most part. The way that this typically is used is because we have our frequency set up. What this means is that we can adjust these independently. So say that you were starting on an image, and this is why people are asking, why didn't you use it before? What you can do is, say if you were on your low pass layer, and you select current layer, what happens is you can heal out the color of a blemish without touching the texture. And then you can independently heal out or clone out the texture of a blemish separately. So they're done independently. The reason why I don't do that initially is because whenever I'm healing, it typically takes care of my texture and color information together in a way that's better than doing independently. When I heal, every stroke will heal texture and the color of a blemish. Because when I'm healing, I'm typically removing something or a substance that has both texture and color together. I don't trust myself well enough to do them independently, which is fine. If you have that workflow, it's okay. But again, this is just my workflow. And that's another reason why people use this quite often. Now, there's been something recently where people have gotten really carried away with this, where they start really damaging files by moving textures around too much and colors around too much, and that can create a lot of problems. So that's also why I don't use it initially, because I want to just quickly use my healing brush, and I found that faster for my purposes at least. Now, so what does this really mean? You know, why are we even bothering with this? Why should we care? Well, a really important reason is that now that we have our color and light separated, we can even out tonalities manually in a way that we don't have to dodge and burn every single minute little pixel. So essentially what this means is For example, let me find a good area to consider. Like say the chest, for example. We have a lot of minute details going on. What I'm going to do is select a blank layer underneath the two, or between them. And what I'm going to do with that is I'll have a brush selected. I'll make sure that my brush is soft. And I will start sampling colors of the skin and brushing out gently, very minutely, mind you, not to alter the image too much, and make sure those minute transitions are evened out so that it replicates the hours you typically spend dodging and burning to minute degrees, which is why it's still important to dodge and burn initially to be able to get as close as you can to a reasonable point. Obviously, it's like the principle of diminishing returns. After a certain point, like 90%, every single percentage doubles your time frame. So with me, in regards to efficiency, I will get to that 85 to 90% of dodging and burning. And then with this technique, I will gently, with a few strokes, even out areas with harsh transitions or micro transitions where you see a lot of little micro blemishes. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. So let me make sure I have a really good area selected to show you exactly what I'm talking about. So say, for example, here. I'm going to go and rotate this real quick. Say I have my brush selected, and I'm going to sample, say, along this color here. Let's say that I want to not only even out the transition, but also replace the color of the highlight with a neutral color that's resembling something closer to the edges of the skin. I'm going to select a really low flow. Again, flow is important. And a really soft brush. So I'll select the brush, and I'll start brushing. And what happens is any area, so let me go and tone down this highlight real quick. So I'll select a really neutral color close to the highlight and just tone it down. And what typically happens is when I turn it on and off, the highlight color itself dissipates while the texture of the area still stays intact. So it's kind of like a replacement as well. So you can do things to even out skin tones naturally, or replace and subdue highlights even. And it's fantastic because you can also use this to further emphasize the makeup. So say you have highlights in the makeup you want to tone down as well. You can sample the same color and tone it down. Or if you want to improve the transitions of the makeup, you can select it and then brush it out and brush it in. And what happens is the transitions become really smooth and gentle without disrupting a lot of the texture of the image. Now, similarly, going back up top, along the transitions, what you can do is you can sample along the transition line and even out a lot of those micro blemishes, or what do you call them? Areas that are dark and light, the blotchiness per se. And you can sample and gently, with a really low flow, lessen the effect of those intense transitions or blotchy areas. Even along the highlights over here, people think, it's really impossible to get rid of or subdue. But what happens is you can select a neutral color and then bring it in the area of the highlight. And what happens is it not only evens out the blotchy areas of the forehead, because again, I'm not doing a lot of strokes. It's literally just 2 or 3 strokes that even out the skin just enough where there's still realism there in regards to the natural dark or light areas, but it's still evening out things naturally. And so even on this ridge line over here, I can sample the color here and fill in those beautiful highlights that are now much better than they were before. And similarly, on the other part of the face, I can sample the color and tone down those highlights under her face, and even out that transition. I can even out transitions next to the face over here. This also I rotate tool is very important. So I can work across all contours of her face with just a few strokes. Even across the makeup. So if you have makeup that's extremely transitioned and you're getting a lot of grittiness that you may want to tone down just a bit, you can even out the colors by doing the same thing, because the luminosity, well, I guess you could say the texture still stays intact, but you're just going and tampering with the tones of the makeup. So all those creases and everything just stay there. What happens, the makeup just becomes more beautifully transitioned. And the key is always subtlety, which is why I dodge and burn as much as I can prior to doing this step, because if you try to do this step first, what would happen is you'd get quite carried away. When there's more to even out in that sense, what happens is it becomes impossible to control the step without going too far. And because my flow is low, I can see the change as it's coming in, so I know not to go too far, or know that my transitions need to be neutral. So you look at the forehead, for example, you see how brighter it was when you tone it down. Yeah.
So you don't specifically like contour in your dodge and burn, or you just kind of overall contour throughout the process then, and not have like a specific contouring
set?
Yeah.
I typically won't contour most of my shots. I think contour is kind of optional. If a photographer wants me to, it would either come during the dodge and burn step, optionally if you know for sure what you like, or it can be something in your extra step. So you can say, I want to leave contouring till the end. So it makes it completely modifiable. I would probably do things like enhance the makeup through contouring, but I wouldn't go as far as contouring the whole face, because sometimes it goes really wrong. If you've seen some images that are contoured improperly, and I try to stay away from that, because unless you're very confident in contouring a face, then it becomes very difficult to control that. But the techniques would be exactly the same. Yeah. And so now what happens is, as I zoom out and look at the image, it still has this beautiful radiance about her, and the transitions are evened out. The important thing to remember about this is the fact that you have to keep sampling and changing your brush size depending on where you're working. And secondly, you have to be able to ensure that you're not changing her face shape and only evening out the areas that are extremely blotchy. Because you're not doing the entire face, you're just doing the areas that need work, essentially. Or even here, when I would take a color, I'm going to even out the areas of the skin just based on how blotchy they were. And again, like I mentioned, typically, you would spend the time to dodge and burn everything to get to that certain point. So it's not like this step will really, take place of everything. But it does help, especially when you have these really, really small transitions that are impossible to blend in, right? It's like a makeup principle, isn't it? It's like doing makeup under the skin, where your skin texture can be perfect still. And the best part about this is you can mask it and take it out in case you've gone too far. This also happens on the skin arm whenever you see these really small areas. And again, I want to mention that this is just something that I do, because it is something I feel allows me to have the efficiency with the results time-wise. But it is also imperative to know that everyone has a different workflow, and again, nothing is set in stone, nothing is fact. But these are all tools to help you get to where you want to go. And the best part about this is the fact that my texture is still precedent and set on top. So I'm basically sampling and just doing a couple of strokes in the direction of the light or shadow, and sampling colors again and again. So if I'm working on a shadow, I'll sample in the shadow region, just like the same principles with healing. So what happens is when you zoom in, all the texture and everything still remains. All those fine details are still there. But what happens is you see that you have these little micro transitions that even out. It really makes things look extremely beautiful as they transition over. And I think it really works well in areas where you see makeup, right? It's beautiful because what happens is these little gaps here get faded together. And I would have done that manually anyway by burning those in those light bits and lightening those dark bits to this level, where you could still see some bits that are darker or lighter, but I wouldn't go much further. However, and I mention this because it's very easy to be carried away with this process and why flow is extremely important. Let's say I have another blank layer and I have my flow really high. You could actually fill up the whole layer, right? So it is limitless in that sense, which is why I mentioned the flow and why I mentioned that you have to be very careful with how much you do it, because it can do exactly what you want it to do, but you have to be very gentle with it. Oops, delete that layer. Go back to my flow. This is also another method to fill in eyebrows because the texture is independent from the color itself of the underlying area within the eyebrows. So let me go in and fill in a few more gaps here, just for the sake of demonstration. Typically, I wouldn't go further than this, really. It's just, again, a finishing step, like a cherry on top, so to speak, but a beautiful little cherry. Yeah.
Would you replace color for, say, like lips or something, if the photographer wanted that here, or in your color processing?
In my color processing. Okay. Yeah, definitely, because when you try to replace an entire color using this step, it won't look accurate, because within the lip itself, you have white because of the highlights, you also have red, so you have to, when you try to replicate that, it's very difficult. So I typically use things like curves or hue saturation to change and swap out colors, so it keeps the luminosity of the white areas or dark areas and so forth. Good question. This is also great for backgrounds as well. It does a lot for that. Any areas that have a little bit of creasing going on, it takes care of that too. And because my flow is so low, I'm only doing a couple of strokes here and there. I'm not doing a lot, because you can see the change is very gradual because of the fact that I'm not doing insane amount of work. It's just a few steps here and there, because again, if my flow is high, what's going to happen is it will totally change everything about the model. Now, even within the ridges of the nose, you can even that out. Even tone this highlight a bit, if you'd like. You can diminish the appearance of these little freckles here. Even add some more makeup. You can see the fine lines and everything are still there, but the transitions are much cleaner. And if any of the hot spot bothers you even more, you can take that down to another extent as well. Like if you notice on the forehead, what happens is when I turn on and off, you see how powerful those highlights were originally, and you can tone that down. In any place you feel like you've gone too far, you can always add a mask. and essentially just even out the area. And what happens is when you put this together, you get this really nice image where the transitions are extremely beautiful. And the best part about this is that, again, you can always drop the opacity completely or bring it in subtly. So you control everything in every area that you want. So again, this is not a step that you have to do. But I think it's great in instances where it's very difficult to tone down particular areas or transition things. And so a lot of times people ask me, how do you get those extremely beautiful transitions but still keep the texture detail there? And that's how I do it. Because after my dodge and burn step and I get really close, my last 2 or 3% will be just to finish it off to a certain degree. It may not be to this extent, because my dodge and burn is more extensive. However, this could meet me halfway there, if necessary.